Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another Seraphim Space live webinar on the Seraphim Space Index Q2 24. I'd like to welcome to the conversation Seraphim investor Lucas Bishop, who's one of the key members of the team who puts this together. It's a fantastic piece of research that is much relied upon by anyone looking to invest and better understand the ecosystem. Hi, Lucas.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks for joining me today. And I'm going to run through, as normal, in a Q&A style, asking Lucas some key questions on his findings in the report. And we also love taking questions from the audience, as usual. So please post them in the chat and we'll get through them either if they're relevant as we go along or at the end of the webinar. But if we don't have time to get to any of them today, Lucas and the rest of the team are happy to pop into our Seraphim page and answer any questions you may have. So let's go from here. The index came out last week. We released it as a PDF, and also we've now got an interactive dashboard, which is awesome, that people can use to look up any of the data post this webinar as well, which is great. So Lucas, first question for you. How has the space sector demonstrated growth and resilience in this last quarter of 24, in your opinion?
Yeah, so space tech investment for the last quarter has been looking relatively good, clocking in at about 2.4 billion. This has been the fourth quarter of a continued upward positive trajectory in terms of the total amount of investment raised. So over the past 12 months, raising about $8.5 billion in total. For this quarter, it was driven primarily in large part by quite decent sized rounds in kind of early growth stage businesses and kind of Series A, Series B, Series C. And just looking at the quality of these businesses, generally pretty strong. So yeah, no, it's been a good quarter in terms of investment, continued upward trajectory.
Great to hear. And what about just compared to general VC investment? That's also...
Yeah, so in our report we've benchmarked general VC and space investment. I think we benchmark it against, or we index it against 100 in early 2018. And what we've seen is, so space tech and general VC went through a bit of a boom and bust cycle in 2021 and following. Space tech seems to have outperformed. I mean, because it's a growing sector, particularly in terms of the number of deals raised. I think where we are at today, almost every quarter surpasses the last one in terms of total number of deals. And this quarter was, I think, another record breaker in terms of around 170 space VC deals completed in the quarter. In terms of investment, after the kind of the pullback from 2021, it's a little bit down from the peak, but still kind of quite far in excess of where general VC was relatively. So yeah, performing quite well.
Awesome, great news for all space tech investors. You touched on it briefly, but what are the factors you think that has contributed to this increase? Anything in particular, or?
Yeah, so in the current year to date, there's been one quite interesting factor, which was that China has been raising a lot of extremely large rounds. Q1 was kind of punctuated by that near $1 billion investment into Shanghai Spacecom, which is a Chinese LEO constellation. This quarter, the two largest deals were both also Chinese businesses. So Minnow Space, a business which manufactures satellites, and Space Pioneer, a business that launches rockets. But yeah, with the combination of these three businesses in the first half of 2024, they really significantly added to the total investment. And as a result, it's meant that China's been kind of the number one geography for investment for the year to date, which is quite a reversal from the historic trends where US would kind of lead by quite a landslide. So quite an interesting development and kind of shift in the profile of investment into space.
Was this a surprise? Like, you do see China staying in the top spots. What's the the rationale? They're trying to compete with kind of their US counterparts, perhaps, or?
It was definitely surprising, but it definitely has its rationale, I think. So China's obviously trying to build out their capabilities in space. On the government side, they're doing some very interesting space science missions, like we saw with the lunar return vehicle. Also on the government side, they're operating their own space station and have astronauts in orbit as well, doing R&D and space science. On the commercial side, it seems like there's quite a drive to replicate or build up some of the capabilities that the West already has. So in fact, the three businesses that I just mentioned all have many kind of analogous capabilities to what SpaceX has already done for the US in terms of launch, satellite manufacturing, and as well LEO satcoms. So I think in the commercial sphere, people would probably agree that China's lacking the US, and as a result, they're investing very heavily to catch up on that front.
Do you think it would be possible that they could, compete with SpaceX, for example, Starlink, or is that not? Is that in the very long term?
Yeah, and potentially in some geographies, I think in the West, people are going to gravitate towards the Western providers, and in China, they're gravitating towards their own. And then maybe in geographies that are maybe slightly less affiliated one way or the other, they might have the option to select from both.
Yeah, interesting. How does this investment revival compare, to the highs that we saw back in 2021?
Yeah, so the highs in 2021 were driven primarily by some of the more mature new space businesses. So $1.7 billion rounds into SpaceX, $1.4 billion into Sierra, and then multi-hundred millions into Relativity and OneWeb, to name just a few. So what we're seeing now, in fact, and we see this in the numbers, is that as of the last quarter, actually relatively little of the investment went into these kind of late growth rounds. The majority of investment volume is kind of in that A to C range, at least as of the last quarter, with this kind of next wave of emerging space tech startups. So I think where investors through 2021 were backing some of the kind of already standout clear winners, we're seeing kind of another wave of startups slightly earlier in their journey, but being well funded in much larger numbers, where I guess investors still see a lot of promise for building the next generation of space unicorns. So it looks very promising.
So you think what does that do for investor confidence? The fact that they're focusing on these super early companies.
I just think it signals that there is quite a lot of investor confidence in the long-term opportunity within space. I think we've seen a lot of investment into kind of the picks and shovels opportunities. So in our taxonomy, we have a segment called Build, which is generally businesses that are either manufacturing satellites or subcomponents or propulsion systems, generally like the hardware that ultimately powers the rest of the space economy downstream. And that is the segment that's seen kind of the highest volume of deals, around kind of 50 odd in the quarter. So yeah, quite a lot in the picks and shovels of the space economy. I think that indicates that people believe that the space industry is big enough to support many different businesses building products and hardware that service the space industry itself. But no, yeah, broadly, I think it signals good interest.
Yeah, definitely. It's great to see. As I said earlier, but please, anyone's got any questions for Lucas, please pop them in the chat and we can get them as we go along or at the end. You mentioned in the PDF that direct-to-cell technology. I know it's been in all the papers recently, has made huge strides. Can you explain to people what that really means, for everyday people like us, mobile phone users?
Yeah. So I think direct-to-cell has been making massive strides, and just in terms of some of the news items that we've seen over the last quarter, Starlink has been upping their pace of satellite rollout. So there's now over 100 direct-to-cell Starlink satellites that have launched to date, and they're planning to enter service toward the end of this year. AST saw a pretty meaningful share price inflection on the back of new partnerships with Verizon, and also Apple announced in their iOS 18 update the expansion of messaging capabilities beyond just SOS to some more general messaging. So this is all very exciting. I mean, it puts satellite connectivity in the hands of everyday people like you and I at very low cost. Typically and historically, satellite connectivity had really been the domain of extremely high value use cases where you need a dedicated and typically quite expensive power hungry terminal. But these days, as kind of direct to cell technology advances, we're ultimately going to be able to access satellite connectivity from extremely low cost and very convenient devices, and potentially never be unconnected, whether we're in the air or on a remote island or out at sea. So yeah, I think it's very interesting. I mean, it makes satcoms so massively accessible and expands the market that's addressable by satcoms enormously. So I think we're definitely very excited by what's happening in direct to cell. I think it's a huge opportunity for massive value creation.
Yeah, and just all those. I mean, can't remember what the percentage was, but already I think it's how much of the world's so underserved by satellite technology at the moment, and it'll just eradicate all of that, and there'll be no blackout zones, and yeah, it's super exciting for people all over the world.
Yeah, I think the statistic is that about 10% of the Earth's surface is covered by terrestrial connectivity. Yeah, and of course, satellite can address the other 90.
Yeah, cool, exciting. I mean, huge market there. It's always super exciting to see that the new Starship launches as they happen, and obviously millions of people around the world are tuning in to hear those. But we get some sort of sometimes negative commentary, people not understanding that these things need to be tested effectively. What does the success of Starship mean for the industry, and what are we learning from these constant launches?
Yeah, so SpaceX has obviously already once revolutionized the space industry by making a launch far more frequent, far more affordable, and it's really been catalytic in basically enabling the majority of our portfolio companies in rolling out their constellations at an affordable price. Obviously, Starship can then take this forward and multiply that by orders of magnitude with 100 plus tons to orbit. So with even lower costs and with even higher mass available to take to orbit, it starts to open up new future opportunities. I mean, it improves the economics for our existing portfolio, but it could start to open up more possibilities in space manufacturing, in point-to-point transportation, in potentially building large structures in space for space stations and other use cases, and obviously. The Artemis program relies on Starship to start kickstart at least the initial part of it, which is going to be mostly government lunar missions, but potentially a lunar economy in the long run. So yeah, it has a huge impact. Obviously, I assume most people would have probably tuned into the fourth test mission of SpaceX, which was incredibly exciting to watch with a dramatic melting of one of the fins. But yeah, I think everyone at SpaceX would have been extremely happy with the result of re-entering and performing kind of demonstration landings of both the upper and first stage. So I think it's very, very exciting for all of us.
Yeah, awesome stuff. You mentioned China earlier, but were there any other surprises when you looked at the top deals?
China was the main one, I would say. We also typically so we have a category in our taxonomy called downlink, and that's typically reserved for kind of antenna technologies and cybersecurity. Basically, people involved in the communication of space data, and it's typically a relatively small segment for investment. And in this quarter, quite unusually, we saw one of those businesses, again, actually a Chinese business called Emposat in the top 10, raising about 70 or so million for satellite communications products. So yeah, didn't expect that. That was quite a surprise out of the largest deals for the quarter. But no, yeah, the primary one was China, I would say.
Yeah, and I think you reported on, North America is continuing to lead, but Asia is it Asia catching up with Europe? Yeah.
Well, it depends. It depends over what time frame you kind of look at the data. But in year to date, 2024, yeah, China is, but by a thin margin, but they have raised more money than the US.
Oh, right.
In
Okay.
year to date,
In
which
year to
is yeah, which is we would yeah. I mean, that is the big headlines of Rise. I would say
Yeah.
typically North America is led by a very significant margin. Any other geography, but this is the first kind of half of the year where that has reversed.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you. Let's talk about new opportunities emerging in the space sector. What areas are attracting, what sectors, sorry, are attracting significant early stage investment? As you said, more early stage companies are getting investment. Which sectors are you seeing that in? And geographies actually might be interesting.
Yeah, in by number of deals that are happening, this quarter saw a lot in, as I mentioned already, the build segment. So people building satellites. So we saw a very big round for Apex Space. People building subcomponents and propulsion systems. So there were quite a lot of kind of Series AB deals in this quarter as kind of picks and shovels opportunity in space. We also saw Varda raise a fairly large round off the back of their long-awaited but successful return to Earth of their capsule, and the in-space economy continues to capture people's interest quite significantly, and it's an area that we're quite actively looking in with the levels of investment that remain far higher than any time before 2021. I think if you look at 2020 or prior, the whole in-space economy was basically a rounding error in terms of total investment, but it's come on leaps and bounds in a very short space of time. And I think we're seeing some of the early signals of people starting to manufacture even in very small quantities in space. Varda's they've done one trial, and you can only anticipate that they're going to ramp up the cadence that they will do more.
What do they do? Sorry, Varda.
So I think their long-term ambition is to reformulate drugs in microgravity, but I mean, a return capsule has quite a lot of cross-cutting applications in terms of manufacturing of materials or drug reformulation, or again point-to-point transportation. And I think some of their larger contracts are also even just testing hypersonic materials for US DoD. So quite a few different applications, but the key one I think they're looking for actually is pharma.
Super interesting, and think something that people always think's completely science fact, but it's happening now. That's fascinating stuff. Lucas, based on the trends that you identified, what do you think is the outlook for the sector in the next half? What are you predicting? Are you predicting it's still on an upward trajectory, or?
I think it can only be broadly positive kind of outlook for the rest of the year. Obviously, we went through the hype cycle in 2021, and then a pullback in investment accordingly after that. But we seem to be on a relatively slow but gradual increasing slope of investment and number of deals. I think we're seeing a lot of deals at the early stage, which we can only assume over time will kind of graduate up progressively through those later rounds and provide a healthy pipeline of future later stage deals. So no, I think it's going to be probably not return to the highs of 2021, not for quite some time, but I think we're on a good and sustainable trajectory, I would say.
Awesome. And what about you personally? Like, what sectors are you interested in, and what sectors are Seraphim particularly interested in, if you can reveal?
Yeah. I think we've space is very interesting because it cuts across a couple of really key domain or areas of importance today. Obviously, climate being a key one. I think the statistic is that 30 of the 50 essential climate variables are measured best from space, and obviously climate change is a very real and pressing concern on many people's minds. So, and space has a very, very large role to play on that. So I think that's one very important area where space does a really good job. We've seen a lot of satellite constellations, which are going to go up and and measure the Earth across all kinds of different spectral bands and cadences and resolutions. So very, very keen to see, how startups and new businesses leverage this data to create interesting products and analytics and solutions for end users. And then I think the other very kind of key thing that space cuts across today is defense. So obviously the world's in a bit of a tense geopolitical moment at the moment, and satcoms and PNT and resilient connectivity have a lot to do and a big part to play. So I think that's another area. So defense and climate, I think, are both very, very important segments. On top of that, I mean, personally, I'm just quite interested in the space industrial base. I think there's quite a lot of interesting businesses to be built there. The US
Sorry, I missed that bit. The space.
The space industrial base, so manufacturing satellites and subcomponents. I think the US has a pretty pressing need to kind of reshore manufacturing in a worst case event, to just basically secure their own supply chain again. And I think there's quite an opportunity there to kind of innovate and bring in automation and leverage AI in manufacturing to make it more feasible to do back on US soil. So I think there's some interesting stuff to be done there.
Fascinating. Thank you. So much happening. Yeah, and I think we're starting to see real evidence now of that. It's all actually happening and coming back down to earth now. So it's absolutely fascinating space to be in. I was going to go to the questions, but it seems like everyone's more interested in having a bit of a chat amongst themselves in there at the moment, which I think is brilliant. We're pleased to have engagement. But if anyone has anything you want to pick up there, Lucas, I think nothing I can particularly pull out. But if anyone has any questions on anything Lucas has said, or wants to read the index post this webinar and post some questions for us to pick up afterwards, we're more than happy to go in and pick those up.
Someone's asked about the impact of Ariane 6.
Oh,
obviously,
yeah.
Exciting to watch the launch on that one.
Yeah.
Just recently. I think it's very important for Europe to obviously have their own domestic access to space. I think for a lot of our constellations, there is a lack of capacity, and I think after Falcon 9's failure of the upper stage recently, there is still kind of lacking supply of launch, and I think some of our portfolio feel that. So really, bringing more capacity online is really necessary, and Europe's for now quite a while been without a really good domestic launch capacity. So it's in good time and well needed, and hopefully they can ramp up the rate of launch relatively soon, because I think we're very backed up in terms of requiring launch capacity.
Yeah, I mean, what's your opinion on what happened? Was it Friday, the launch? I mean,
I haven't followed it very closely. It's quite bad of me. I need to go back and read up what happened with Falcon 9, but
yes, yeah, I think it was the first time it's actually failed, isn't it? In the entire.
But an extremely long track record of successful launches.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. I think it just proves that these things are incredibly hard. But obviously, having another company, who could serve Europe and serve serve all space tech companies would be an amazing thing to happen if anyone can compete. Any other questions from anyone? No. Okay. Well, thank you everyone who tuned in today, and thank you so much, Lucas, for answering the questions so clearly and insightfully. If anyone, as I said, if anyone has anything else to ask, please post them in the chat. You'll find the PDF version of the index on our website, and also the live dashboard on there, which anyone can have a play with and pull out whatever they need. Cool. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lucas.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.